I stand frozen in the doorway of my study, watching my wife Elena carefully arrange our wedding photos in a scrapbook that isn't meant for us, her delicate fingers writing David and me in elegant script beneath a photo that should say Marcus and Elena. And the pen in her hand might as well be a knife carving out my heart, because I realize in this moment that everything I believed about my marriage, my business partner, my entire life has been a carefully orchestrated lie designed to destroy the sterling family legacy that my great-great-grandfather built from nothing. The woman I loved enough to merge our pharmaceutical empire with her failing textile business sits at my mahogany desk, the same desk where my father taught me about honor and loyalty, using our most sacred memories to build a shrine to her betrayal with David Chen, my Harvard roommate, my best man, the person I trusted with every secret and every dream I ever had about expanding Sterling Pharmaceuticals into the Asian markets where his family connections could open doors that generations of Sterling money never could. "I was going to tell you after the Henderson merger was complete," Elena says without looking up, her voice carrying that same musical quality that made me fall in love with her 2 years ago, when she walked into my office wearing a navy dress that matched her eyes, desperate to save her father's company, and somehow convinced me that saving her meant saving myself, though now I understand she was never the drowning woman I thought I was rescuing, but rather the siren leading me toward the rocks. The Henderson merger that I've been negotiating for 8 months, pouring Sterling family resources and reputation into what I believed would secure our position in the global pharmaceutical market. But David has been negotiating with them behind my back, using the insider information Elena fed him during pillow talk sessions that I thought were expressions of love, but were actually intelligence-gathering missions designed to give him every advantage he needed to position himself for a hostile takeover that would leave the Sterling name as nothing more than a footnote in medical industry history books. Our 3rd wedding anniversary is tomorrow. And instead of planning a romantic dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date, I'm discovering that my wife has been having an affair with my business partner for 18 months. Which means it started during our honeymoon in Singapore, when I thought she was homesick and David was being a good friend by calling to check on us. But those late-night phone calls weren't friendly check-ins, but rather strategy sessions for dismantling everything my family spent 5 generations building. "The timeline doesn't matter, Marcus," Elena continues, finally meeting my eyes with that practiced expression of regret that I now realize she's been rehearsing for months. "What matters is that David and I found something real, something that goes beyond business arrangements and family expectations, something you wouldn't understand because you've never had to fight for anything in your life, never had to choose between love and security the way people like us do. People like, yes." As if her father's textile fortune didn't span 3 generations, as if she didn't grow up in a mansion overlooking the Connecticut River, as if marrying me was some kind of desperate last resort rather than the calculated business decision it clearly was, designed to gain access to Sterling family connections and pharmaceutical patents that David could never touch through legitimate means, so they needed an inside agent who could charm her way into my bed and my boardroom simultaneously. The scrapbook lies open between us like evidence in a courtroom, our wedding photos carefully arranged with new captions that rewrite our history, transforming sacred moments into tools for her new narrative, where she was always the victim, and I was always the obstacle standing between her and true happiness, each image annotated with dates and details that will probably surface during our divorce proceedings as proof that she tried to save our marriage, while I became increasingly controlling and paranoid about my business partner's growing influence over company decisions. But I'm not paranoid, I'm finally awake, because the pieces are falling into place with horrifying clarity. My parents' car accident 6 months ago that killed them both on a rainy Tuesday morning when their brakes mysteriously failed on a curve they'd driven safely for 30 years. David's sudden interest in updating our corporate insurance policies the week before, Elena's insistence that I give her power of attorney during my father's final illness so she could help manage the emotional burden of making difficult business decisions. The shell companies that started appearing in our financial statements around the same time she began working late at the office 3 nights a week. Elena's pregnancy announcement last month should have been the happiest moment of our marriage. But now I'm counting back the weeks and realizing the timing aligns perfectly with David's business trip to London, where Elena inexplicably decided she needed to accompany him to explore textile import opportunities. And when I suggested coming along to make it a working vacation, she insisted it would be more productive if they could focus entirely on business without the distraction of romantic dinners and tourist attractions. "You're not saying anything," Elena observes, closing the scrapbook with deliberate care and placing it in her designer handbag. The same Hermes bag I bought her for our first anniversary, when I still believed expensive gifts could express emotions that words couldn't capture. Back when I thought love was about grand gestures rather than daily choices, before I learned that some people view generosity as weakness and trust as stupidity. What could I possibly say that would change anything at this point, when she's already moved her clothes out of our bedroom and into the guest suite, when David's been fielding calls from pharmaceutical distributors who think he's the primary decision-maker at Sterling Industries, when I've been excluded from meetings about my own company's expansion plans because they claim I'm too emotionally invested to make rational choices about international partnerships? The whiskey on my desk looks tempting. Aged Scottish single malt that my father saved for celebrating major business victories. But Elena's watching me with an expression that suggests she's waiting for me to do something predictable, something that will fit the narrative she's been constructing about my declining mental health and inability to handle stress. So instead, I pour myself a glass of water from the pitcher she thoughtfully prepared earlier, though now I'm wondering what might be dissolved in seemingly innocent refreshments. "The pregnancy changes things," I say finally, because even in the midst of betrayal and corporate espionage, the possibility of a child demands acknowledgement, demands some attempt at civilized conversation about custody arrangements and financial responsibilities, though I suspect David and Elena have already consulted lawyers about minimizing my parental rights while maximizing my child support obligations. "Not really," Elena replies, and her smile carries a coldness I've never seen before, the mask finally slipping to reveal the calculation beneath years of carefully performed affection. "David is excited about becoming a father, and unlike you, he doesn't see children as complications to business plans or extensions of family legacy pressures. He sees them as opportunities to build something new and beautiful in the world." The implication hits me like ice water in my veins. The child isn't mine, has never been mine, but they'll use paternity laws and my emotional attachment to leverage whatever custody arrangement serves their purposes best, probably involving generous financial support from the Sterling Trust Fund that David can then redirect toward his competing pharmaceutical ventures through creative accounting methods that Elena learned during her MBA program at Wharton. Everything hurts now. Not just my heart, but my entire body. Like I'm coming down with the flu, except I know it's not illness, but the physical manifestation of betrayal. The way your immune system tries to reject reality when it becomes too toxic to process normally, and the room is starting to spin slightly, which might be exhaustion from discovering that my entire adult life has been a lie, or might be something more sinister in that whiskey I didn't drink or the water I did. "I'm going to David's apartment tonight," Elena announces, gathering her purse and jacket with the efficiency of someone who's planned this conversation down to the minute. "My lawyer will contact yours tomorrow about the divorce papers, and I think it's best if we keep all future communication professional, for the baby's sake if nothing else." She pauses at the door, and for just a moment I think she might say something that acknowledges what we once meant to each other, some recognition of the genuine happiness we shared before greed and ambition poisoned everything good between us, But instead she simply adjusts her wedding ring, sliding it off her finger and placing it carefully on the bookshelf next to my father's photograph. "I hope someday you'll understand that this isn't personal, Marcus," she says with the tone someone might use to discuss weather or stock prices. "It's just business, and David and I are better at business than you are because we're willing to make difficult choices that you're too sentimental to make, which is why Sterling Pharmaceuticals needs new leadership if it's going to survive in the global market." The door closes behind her with a soft click that sounds unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. And I'm alone with the whiskey and the water and the growing certainty that this conversation was never about confession or closure, but about establishing my mental state for whatever comes next, creating a record of my erratic behavior and emotional instability that will support their narrative when my body is discovered tomorrow morning in this same chair where I'm sitting now, with a suicide note apologizing for my business failures and expressing hope that Elena and David can rebuild what my incompetence destroyed. But I won't give them that satisfaction, won't make their hostile takeover quite so easy. So I reach for my phone to call Alexander Kim, the corporate lawyer who approached me last year with concerns about David's financial practices, except my fingers are becoming difficult to control, and the screen keeps blurring in and out of focus, which confirms my suspicions about the water pitcher that Elena prepared so thoughtfully before our little conversation about divorce and custody and the future of Sterling Pharmaceuticals under new management. The last thing I remember is David's voice in the hallway, discussing with Elena how to position my death as the tragic end of a man who couldn't handle losing his wife to a better man, couldn't accept that his family's pharmaceutical empire was obsolete in the modern global economy, couldn't survive the revelation that even his unborn child preferred another father. And as consciousness slips away, I understand that they've planned every detail of this night with the same precision they applied to stealing my company, my marriage, and my life. Then I open my eyes and realize I have been reborn. But not in some mystical sense of spiritual renewal or religious transformation, rather in the most literal way possible. I'm sitting in my office chair 3 years earlier, on the exact day I was supposed to meet Elena Whitmore for the first time, and every detail of the room is precisely as it was then. From the fresh flowers my assistant arranged this morning to the contract drafts scattered across my desk for a textile partnership that I now know will destroy everything I care about. The calendar on my computer shows the date clearly, and my reflection in the darkened window shows a younger face without the stress lines that marked my final months, without the gray hair that appeared during my parents' illness, without the exhaustion that comes from fighting a war you don't know you're losing until the enemy has already won. My first instinct is to call security and have David Chen escorted from the building immediately to protect Sterling Pharmaceuticals from the cancer that I allowed to grow within our company structure. But then I realized that would accomplish nothing except alerting him to my knowledge of his future betrayal, giving him time to develop alternative strategies for achieving the same destructive goals through different methods. Instead, I need to be strategic, need to use my knowledge of their plans to systematically dismantle their conspiracy before it can take root, need to protect my family and my company while ensuring that Elena and David face consequences for crimes they haven't technically committed yet, but absolutely will commit, given the opportunity to repeat the same patterns that led to my death in what I now understand was my previous life. David walks through my office door right on schedule, carrying coffee and wearing the Harvard class ring that symbolized our friendship back when I believed friendship meant loyalty rather than reconnaissance. And he's smiling with the same genuine warmth that convinced me to trust him with sterling family secrets, to give him access to our pharmaceutical patents, to treat him like the brother I never had rather than the snake he always was. "Ready to change the world, Marcus?" he asks, settling into the leather chair across from my desk where he'll eventually plan my murder with my wife, and his enthusiasm seems so authentic that I almost doubt my memories of his betrayal, almost convince myself that the previous 3 years were just an elaborate nightmare rather than lived experience. But then I notice the way his eyes calculate the value of everything in my office, the way he positions himself to see both my computer screen and the confidential documents I've carelessly left visible. "Actually, David, I've been thinking about our Asian expansion plans," I say, watching his face carefully for any reaction that might confirm his ulterior motives. "And I'm wondering if we should postpone the pharmaceutical distribution partnerships until we have better market research about local regulations and cultural considerations that might affect our business model." The disappointment flickers across his features for just a fraction of a second before his practiced smile returns. But that momentary lapse tells me everything I need to know about his investment in our expansion timeline, his urgent need to establish those distribution channels that would give him access to sterling patents and international contacts that he could later exploit through competing companies. "I think you're being overly cautious, Marcus," David replies, leaning forward with the persuasive intensity that convinced me to ignore my instincts about moving too quickly into unfamiliar markets. "Opportunity doesn't wait for perfect information, and if we hesitate too long, other pharmaceutical companies will establish the relationships we need to secure our position in the Asian markets, where the real growth potential exists for companies like ours." Companies like ours, as if Sterling Pharmaceuticals belongs to both of us equally, as if 5 generations of Sterling family innovation and investment should be shared with someone whose only contribution is ethnic connections and manipulative charm. Someone who views our partnership as a stepping stone toward replacing me entirely, rather than supporting the mutual success that genuine partnerships require. "Maybe you're right," I concede, allowing him to think his persuasion is working while I mentally catalog every argument he makes, every pressure point he tries to exploit, every piece of information he seeks about our company's financial position and strategic planning. Because understanding his methods now will help me anticipate his moves when I begin systematically destroying his ability to threaten my family's legacy. My phone buzzes with a reminder about the Elena Whitmore meeting scheduled for this afternoon. The meeting where she'll walk into my office wearing that navy dress and begin the seduction campaign that will culminate in our marriage, her access to Sterling family resources, and ultimately my death. But this time I'm prepared for her manipulation, immune to her charm, and determined to ensure that her family's textile business fails naturally rather than being rescued by Sterling generosity that she'll later use as a weapon against me. "Speaking of partnerships," David continues, "I've been thinking we should consider some strategic alliances with companies in complementary industries, maybe textiles or consumer goods, businesses that could benefit from our pharmaceutical expertise while giving us access to their distribution networks and customer bases." The suggestion sounds reasonable on the surface, the kind of synergistic thinking that business schools teach and consultants recommend, but I know it's actually groundwork for introducing Elena into our business relationship, for normalizing the idea that Sterling Pharmaceuticals should rescue failing companies like Whitmore Textiles in exchange for vague promises about cross-industry collaboration that will never materialize. "That's an interesting idea," I reply non-committally, "but I think we should focus on strengthening our core pharmaceutical business before we start diversifying into other industries where we lack expertise and established relationships, especially since our current growth trajectory suggests we'll have plenty of opportunities within our existing market segments." David's second flash of disappointment confirms that he's already counting on Sterling resources to fund whatever scheme he's planning with Elena, already assuming that I'll be as susceptible to her manipulation this time as I was before. But this time I know exactly what she wants, and exactly how she plans to get it, which means I can ensure she gets nothing while she destroys herself trying. The morning passes slowly as I pretend to work on the same contracts and reports that occupied my attention 3 years ago. But now every document looks different through the lens of future knowledge. Every decision carries implications that I couldn't see when I was naive enough to believe that good intentions would protect me from people who view trust as weakness and generosity as opportunity. My assistant knocks and enters with the schedule change that I remember receiving. Elena Whitmore has moved her appointment from 2 o'clock to 1:30, claiming a family emergency that requires her to leave early. Though I now know the real reason is that she wants to catch me during lunch when I'll be relaxed and off guard, more susceptible to her sob story about her father's business and her family's desperate need for sterling partnership. Actually, please call Miss Whitmore and tell her that I need to reschedule our meeting for next week, I instruct my assistant, who looks surprised since I've been emphasizing the importance of this textile partnership for weeks, building up the meeting as a potential breakthrough in our diversification strategy. But I need time to research Elena's background and financial situation before I allow her anywhere near Sterling Pharmaceuticals. The next hour passes in a blur of phone calls and emails, but instead of focusing on the textile partnership that would doom my company, I'm reaching out to Sophia Laurent, the French pharmaceutical heiress whose partnership proposal I rejected last time in favor of David's Asian expansion plans, and her voice carries the same intellectual curiosity and genuine passion for medical research that I remember from our brief correspondence. "Marcus, what a pleasant surprise," Sophia says when my call reaches her office in Lyon. "I was just thinking about our previous discussions regarding collaborative research opportunities between our companies, and I'm curious whether Sterling Pharmaceuticals might be interested in exploring European expansion rather than focusing exclusively on domestic markets." The irony is perfect. While David plots to use Asian connections to steal my company, I can build a legitimate partnership with someone whose family has been in pharmaceuticals as long as mine, someone whose interests align with Sterling Pharmaceuticals rather than competing with us, someone who sees partnership as mutual benefit rather than zero-sum conquest. "I think European expansion might be exactly what we need," I reply, feeling genuine enthusiasm for the first time since my rebirth, because working with Sophia means building something positive rather than just preventing something destructive, means using my second chance to create value rather than just avoiding disaster. We spend 30 minutes discussing research protocols and regulatory frameworks, and her knowledge of pharmaceutical innovation impresses me in ways that Elena's textile expertise never could, because Sophia understands the scientific mission that drives Sterling Pharmaceuticals, the desire to improve human health through chemical innovation rather than just maximizing profit margins through corporate manipulation. By the time I hang up, I've scheduled a trip to France for next month to visit Sophia's laboratories and meet her research team, and I've begun drafting a partnership proposal that will give Sterling Pharmaceuticals access to European markets without compromising our independence or our family legacy, a real partnership between equals rather than a predatory scheme disguised as business collaboration. David returns from lunch with takeout containers and an expectant expression, clearly anticipating that my meeting with Elena will result in the sterling investment in Whitmore Textiles that would give him another avenue for accessing our company resources. But instead, I'm working on partnership documents for a French pharmaceutical company that he's never heard of and can't influence. "How did the textile meeting go?" he asks, trying to sound casual while his eyes scan the documents on my desk, looking for information about Elena's family business and the potential investment terms that would affect his own plans for Sterling Pharmaceuticals' future. "I rescheduled it," I reply, enjoying the way his carefully maintained composure cracks slightly at this unexpected development. "I decided we should focus on pharmaceutical partnerships rather than diversifying into textiles right now, so I'm exploring some opportunities in Europe instead of Asia." The silence stretches uncomfortably as David processes this information and its implications for his timeline, his need to establish the Elena connection quickly so they can begin the systematic infiltration of Sterling Pharmaceuticals that ultimately led to my murder. But now his careful plans are disrupted by my refusal to follow the script he's been counting on. Europe might not offer the same growth potential as Asia, David finally says, his voice carrying a slight edge that I never noticed before, the sound of someone whose carefully laid plans are being threatened by variables he can't control. And the regulatory environment there is much more complex than what we'd face in Asian markets, where my family connections could smooth the approval process. His family connections that he planned to leverage for personal gain rather than sterling benefit. Connections that would have given him advantages in negotiations while leaving me dependent on his good faith and continued cooperation, which would have lasted exactly as long as it took him to establish competing distribution channels using Sterling Pharmaceutical patents. Maybe complexity isn't necessarily bad, I suggest. Maybe it means that European partnerships will be more stable and long-term, less likely to be disrupted by political changes or economic instability that could affect our investment returns, especially since European regulatory frameworks tend to protect intellectual property more aggressively than some Asian jurisdictions. David's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly, and I realize that intellectual property protection is exactly what he was hoping to avoid. That his plans depended on operating in markets where sterling patents might be less rigorously enforced, where he could potentially develop competing products without facing the legal challenges that would shut down his schemes in more regulated environments. The rest of the afternoon passes quietly as I continue working on the Sophia Laurent partnership, while David makes increasingly frequent phone calls to people he claims are potential Asian distributors, but who are probably Elena and her father, trying to understand why their carefully orchestrated timeline has been disrupted and how they can adapt their strategy to account for my unexpected change in priorities. At 5 o'clock, David suggests we grab drinks to discuss our partnership goals, the same suggestion that led to countless evenings where I shared sterling family secrets and strategic plans over expensive whiskey, not realizing that every confidence I offered was being cataloged and later used against me. But this time I decline politely and head home to my empty penthouse where Elena will never live, where our wedding photos will never decorate the walls, where my marriage will never provide cover for corporate espionage. The evening stretches ahead of me with an emptiness that feels both liberating and terrifying, because I'm free from the betrayal that defined my previous life, but also isolated by knowledge that I can't share with anyone, burdened by memories of a future that I must prevent without being able to explain why prevention is necessary. I pour myself a real drink, not the poisoned water that Elena prepared for my final moments, but genuine Scottish whiskey that my father saved for celebrations. And I toast to my parents who are still alive in this timeline, still driving safely on roads where their brakes haven't been tampered with, still trusting their son to protect the sterling legacy without understanding that protection requires suspicion of people who should be trustworthy. Tomorrow, I'll begin the systematic destruction of David and Elena's plans, but tonight I allow myself to grieve for the innocence I've lost, the ability to trust without calculating consequences, the belief that love and loyalty are natural human impulses rather than strategic vulnerabilities that predators exploit for personal gain. The city lights sparkle beyond my windows like stars that I can finally see clearly now that the fog of deception has lifted. And I understand that my rebirth isn't just about preventing my own death, but about becoming the kind of man who can protect everything worth protecting, while building something better than what my enemies tried to steal. 3 days later, Elena Whitmore calls my office again. her voice carrying the perfect blend of urgency and vulnerability that I remember so well, explaining that her family's textile business is facing an unexpected cash flow crisis, and requesting an emergency meeting to discuss potential partnership opportunities that could benefit both Sterling Pharmaceuticals and Whitmore Textiles through synergistic collaboration. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore," I reply with polite regret, "but Sterling Pharmaceuticals has decided to focus exclusively on pharmaceutical partnerships for the foreseeable future, and we're not currently considering investments in textile or fashion industries, though I wish your family's business the best of luck in finding appropriate investors." The silence on her end tells me everything I need to know about how much she was counting on Sterling Resources to execute whatever plan she and David have developed. And when she finally responds, her voice has lost some of its musical quality, replaced by something harder and more calculating that reveals the predator beneath the facade. "Perhaps we could meet anyway," Elena suggests, "just to discuss the possibility of future collaboration when Sterling Pharmaceuticals is ready to diversify beyond its current market focus, because I think you'd find that Whitmore Textiles has resources and connections that might be valuable even if we're not ready for formal partnership right now." The persistence confirms my suspicions about her real agenda, because someone genuinely interested in textile partnership would accept my polite rejection and move on to other potential investors. But someone running a con game designed to infiltrate Sterling Pharmaceuticals would keep pushing for access even when the business justification has been removed. "I appreciate your interest," I reply, "but my schedule is fully committed for the next several months with existing pharmaceutical projects, and I think it's best if we keep all future communication professional and industry-specific rather than exploring partnerships that don't align with our core business objectives." Elena's forced laugh sounds brittle over the phone connection, the sound of someone whose carefully rehearsed charm offensive has encountered unexpected resistance. And I can almost hear her mentally recalculating her approach, trying to determine whether David's friendship with me might provide alternative access routes to Sterling Family Resources. "Of course, I understand completely," she says with renewed sweetness, "and I hope we'll have opportunities to work together in the future when the timing is better for both our companies, because I really do believe that Sterling Pharmaceuticals and Whitmore Textiles could create something special together. Something special like the systematic looting of 5 generations of Sterling innovation, the theft of pharmaceutical patents, the murder of Sterling family members who might interfere with the hostile takeover, the destruction of everything my ancestors built so that David Chen and Elena Whitmore could establish their own empire on the ashes of mine. But this time I'm prepared for their schemes. This time I have advantages they can't anticipate. This time I'll be the one orchestrating their downfall while they scramble to understand why their carefully laid plans keep falling apart around them." That afternoon, Alexander Kim returns my call with information about David Chen's financial background that confirms my worst suspicions about his hidden agenda. David has been quietly establishing shell companies in 3 different countries, companies with no apparent business purpose except to receive and redistribute funds from sources that aren't immediately traceable, companies that would be perfect vehicles for laundering stolen pharmaceutical patents or pharmaceutical research data. The pattern suggests someone preparing for a major acquisition or hostile takeover, Alexander explains, his voice carrying the cautious tone of a lawyer who's seen too many corporate betrayals. And the timing of these incorporations suggests that Mr. Chen has been planning something significant for at least 18 months, probably longer. 18 months, which matches the timeline of David and Elena's affair in my previous life, which means their relationship was never about romance, but about coordinating their attack on Sterling Pharmaceuticals, using seduction and friendship as weapons in a war that I didn't even know was being fought until it was too late to defend myself. "I want you to monitor his financial activities," I tell Alexander. And I want to know immediately if he starts making any moves toward acquiring Sterling Pharmaceutical stock or establishing partnerships with our competitors, because I suspect he's planning something that could threaten our company's independence. Alexander agrees to investigate discreetly, and I feel the first genuine sense of security since my rebirth, because now I have an ally who understands corporate warfare, someone who can help me build legal defenses against attacks that haven't happened yet, but absolutely will happen unless I take preemptive action. The next month passes in a blur of productive activity as I travel to France to meet Sophia Laurent and tour her family's pharmaceutical facilities, which are everything I hoped they would be. State-of-the-art research laboratories staffed by brilliant scientists who share my passion for medical innovation, manufacturing facilities that maintain the highest quality standards, distribution networks that could give Sterling Pharmaceuticals access to European markets without compromising our independence or our intellectual property. Sophia herself exceeds every expectation, combining scientific expertise with business acumen and an ethical framework that aligns perfectly with Sterling family values, and our partnership discussions feel like genuine collaboration rather than the predatory negotiation that characterized my interactions with David and Elena. I think our companies could accomplish things together that neither could achieve alone, Sophia tells me over dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Loire River, her enthusiasm genuine and infectious. Not just in terms of market access, but in terms of research capabilities, because my family's expertise in molecular chemistry could complement Sterling's pharmaceutical development in ways that might lead to breakthrough treatments for diseases that neither of us could tackle independently. This is what real partnership looks like. Mutual benefit rather than exploitation, shared vision rather than hidden agenda, trust built on demonstrated competence rather than manipulative charm. And I find myself genuinely excited about the future for the first time since my rebirth. We spend 3 days negotiating partnership terms that protect both companies' interests while creating opportunities for collaboration that could revolutionize pharmaceutical research. And when I return to New York, I have contracts that will secure Sterling Pharmaceuticals' European expansion without any dependence on David's Asian connections or Elena's textile industry access. David meets me at the airport with an expression that tries to convey friendly concern, but can't quite hide his frustration at being excluded from negotiations that will significantly impact Sterling Pharmaceuticals' strategic direction, and his questions about the French partnership feel more like interrogation than casual curiosity. "How did the European meetings go?" he asks as we drive back to Manhattan, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. "And what kind of partnership terms did you negotiate with Laurent Industries?" The specific company name tells me that he's been researching Sophia's background, probably trying to understand how her partnership might interfere with his own plans for Sterling Pharmaceuticals, and I wonder if he's already started developing contingency strategies for dealing with European competition for my attention and company resources. "Very well," I reply, without providing the details he's fishing for. Sophia Laurent impressed me as someone who shares our commitment to pharmaceutical innovation rather than just profit maximization. And I think Sterling Pharmaceuticals will benefit significantly from collaborating with researchers who have complementary expertise. The silence that follows tells me that David recognizes the implicit criticism of his own profit-focused approach to pharmaceutical distribution. His willingness to compromise research quality and patent protection in pursuit of rapid market expansion that would benefit him more than Sterling Pharmaceuticals. "I hope you didn't commit to anything exclusive," David says carefully, "because limiting our options for Asian expansion could cost us significant opportunities in markets where growth potential exceeds anything we could achieve in Europe, especially considering the regulatory barriers that might slow down our ability to capitalize on Laurent Industries' partnership." His concern about exclusivity reveals his fear that European partnership will interfere with whatever scheme he's planning with Elena, and his emphasis on Asian expansion sounds increasingly desperate as he realizes that his window for infiltrating Sterling Pharmaceuticals is closing rapidly. "I committed to what makes sense for Sterling Pharmaceuticals," I reply, enjoying the way his jaw tightens at my refusal to provide reassurance about his continued involvement in our company's strategic planning. And I think focusing on one international partnership at a time will give us better results than trying to expand in multiple directions simultaneously. The rest of the drive passes in uncomfortable silence as David processes the implications of my European partnership for his own agenda, and I can almost see him mentally calculating how much time he has left to execute whatever plan he and Elena developed before my unexpected strategic pivot makes their scheme impossible to implement. That evening, Elena calls my personal phone number, which she shouldn't have since I never gave it to her. But David obviously shared it as part of their coordination, though now she's probably calling to discuss adapting their timeline rather than executing their original seduction plan. "Marcus, I hope you don't mind me calling directly," Elena begins with that musical voice that once charmed me completely. "But I wanted to congratulate you on your European partnership and suggest that Whitmore Textiles might be able to support your expansion efforts through our international shipping connections and textile industry relationships that could complement your pharmaceutical business." The suggestion sounds reasonable on the surface, the kind of cross-industry collaboration that business consultants recommend, but I know it's actually another attempt to establish the Elena connection that David needs to access Sterling family resources, another angle of attack when the straightforward seduction approach was blocked by my refusal to meet with her. "That's thoughtful of you to offer," I reply. "But Sterling Pharmaceuticals has already arranged all the logistical support we need for European expansion through Laurent Industries' existing distribution networks, so we won't require additional textile or shipping partnerships for the foreseeable future." Elena's pause tells me that she's genuinely surprised by my continued resistance to her overtures. Probably because David assured her that Sterling men are susceptible to beautiful women with business proposals, but this time I'm immune to her charm because I know exactly what it costs. "Perhaps we could meet for coffee anyway," Elena suggests with increased intensity, "just to discuss the broader business landscape and how textile and pharmaceutical industries might support each other, even if we're not ready for formal partnership right now. Because I think you'd find that I have insights about international markets that might be valuable as you develop your European strategy." The persistence confirms that this isn't about business at all, but about establishing personal contact that can be leveraged for access to Sterling Pharmaceuticals, and I realize that she's probably becoming desperate as her original timeline gets disrupted by my unexpected resistance to manipulation. "I appreciate your interest in our business success," I reply, "but my schedule is fully committed for the next several months with existing pharmaceutical projects, and I think it's best if we keep all communication professional and industry-specific rather than exploring personal meetings that don't have clear business objectives." The silence that follows tells me that Elena is finally beginning to understand that her charm offensive has failed completely, that whatever information David provided about my personality and susceptibilities was either wrong or outdated, that they'll need to develop entirely new strategies for accessing Sterling family resources. "Of course, I understand," Elena finally says, but her voice has lost its musical quality and sounds flat, defeated, revealing the predator beneath the facade who's running out of options for executing her carefully planned con game. 6 weeks later, David requests a private meeting to discuss concerns about Sterling Pharmaceuticals' strategic direction. And I agree because I want to understand how desperate he's becoming and what kind of alternative schemes he might be developing now that his original plan has been thoroughly disrupted. We meet at the same restaurant where he convinced me to trust him with Asian expansion plans, where his enthusiasm for pharmaceutical distribution seemed so genuine that I never questioned his motives or investigated his background. But this time I'm prepared for his manipulation and immune to his charm. Marcus, I'm worried that you're making strategic mistakes that could cost Sterling Pharmaceuticals significant opportunities, David begins, his voice carrying artificial concern that can't quite hide his frustration at being excluded from major business decisions. And I think you should reconsider the European partnership before you commit resources that might be better invested in Asian markets, where growth potential exceeds anything Laurent Industries can offer. The direct challenge to my business judgment feels different this time, more aggressive and less friendly than his previous attempts at persuasion. And I realize that he's abandoned the collaborative facade in favor of more confrontational tactics designed to regain control over Sterling Pharmaceuticals' strategic direction. I appreciate your concern, I reply calmly, but I'm confident that European partnership aligns with Sterling Pharmaceuticals' long-term objectives better than Asian expansion would, especially considering the intellectual property protections and regulatory frameworks that will protect our pharmaceutical patents and research investments. David's expression darkens at my mention of intellectual property protection, confirming my suspicions about his real agenda, his need to operate in markets where Sterling patents might be less rigorously enforced, where he could potentially develop competing products without facing the legal challenges that would shut down his schemes in more regulated environments. You're being paranoid about patent protection, David says with increased aggression, and your European partnership will limit our flexibility for responding to opportunities that require quick decision-making and market adaptation, especially in pharmaceutical distribution, where timing can determine success or failure. The accusation of paranoia sounds exactly like the narrative that Elena used during our divorce proceedings, the claim that I was mentally unstable and unable to make rational business decisions. And I realize that David is already laying groundwork for questioning my competence if he can't regain control over Sterling Pharmaceuticals through persuasion. Maybe paranoia is just realistic caution when dealing with international business, I suggest, watching his face carefully for any reaction that might reveal his true intentions. And maybe quick decision-making isn't always better than careful analysis of potential partners and their long-term objectives. The conversation continues for another hour, but David's arguments become increasingly desperate as he realizes that I'm not going to be swayed by his concerns about European partnership, not going to abandon Sophia Laurent in favor of his Asian expansion plans, not going to provide him with the access to Sterling Pharmaceuticals that his scheme requires. By the time we part company, I'm certain that David will begin developing more aggressive strategies for accessing Sterling family resources, probably involving direct approaches to other family members or attempts to undermine my credibility with the Sterling Pharmaceuticals Board of Directors. But I'm ready for whatever he tries next, because I have advantages he can't anticipate. Knowledge of his future betrayal, alliance with Alexander Kim for legal protection, partnership with Sophia Laurent for legitimate business growth, and most importantly, immunity to the charm and manipulation that made me vulnerable in my previous life. 2 months later, Elena's family business files for bankruptcy, and the news reaches me through industry reports rather than personal communication, though I suspect David hoped I would offer a last-minute rescue package that would give them another avenue for accessing Sterling Pharmaceuticals resources. Instead, I send a brief note expressing sympathy for their business difficulties, while reaffirming that Sterling Pharmaceuticals remains committed to pharmaceutical partnerships rather than textile industry investments, and I feel no guilt about allowing market forces to resolve the Whitmore family's financial problems naturally, rather than enabling their predatory scheme. The bankruptcy proceedings reveal financial irregularities that suggest Elena's father was never the innocent victim of economic circumstances, but rather an active participant in whatever con game his daughter and David were planning, probably hoping to use Sterling Pharmaceuticals resources to fund a lifestyle that Whitmore Textiles could never support legitimately. David's reaction to the bankruptcy news confirms my suspicions about his emotional investment in Elena's family business, his visible distress at losing what he clearly viewed as a crucial component of his scheme. And I realized that their relationship was never about romance, but about coordinating attacks on Sterling Pharmaceuticals from multiple directions simultaneously. Maybe we should reconsider helping Whitmore Textiles, David suggests during our weekly partnership meeting, his desperation barely concealed beneath a facade of business concern. Because bankruptcy proceedings might create opportunities for acquiring their assets at favorable prices, especially their international shipping connections that could support our Asian expansion plans. The suggestion reveals how little he understands about legitimate business partnership, because acquiring distressed assets from bankrupt companies rarely provides the kind of synergistic benefits that real collaboration offers, but more importantly, it confirms that he's still trying to establish some connection to Elena's family, even after their original plan has failed completely. I think Sterling Pharmaceuticals should focus on our European partnership rather than getting involved in bankruptcy proceedings, I reply, enjoying the way his face tightens with frustration. Because Sophia Laurent's family has been in pharmaceuticals for generations and offers exactly the kind of expertise and resources that align with our core business objectives. The meeting ends awkwardly as David realizes that his last avenue for accessing Elena's cooperation has been closed off. That Sterling Pharmaceuticals will not be rescuing Whitmore Textiles from bankruptcy, that his carefully planned scheme has been systematically dismantled without his understanding how or why. 3 days later, Alexander Kim calls with news that David has been quietly attempting to purchase Sterling Pharmaceuticals stock through shell companies, apparently trying to position himself for a hostile takeover now that his infiltration strategy has failed. But the amounts involved are too small to represent serious threat, and the paper trail he's created will provide excellent evidence for corporate espionage charges if necessary. He's also been approaching Sterling Pharmaceuticals board members individually, Alexander reports, trying to raise concerns about your leadership and decision-making. But so far, no one seems receptive to his arguments, especially since your European partnership has been generating positive industry attention and strong financial projections. The confirmation that David is actively working to undermine my position provides the justification I need for more aggressive defensive measures, because attempted hostile takeover and board manipulation constitute legitimate threats to Sterling Pharmaceuticals that require immediate response rather than continued patience. I want you to prepare documentation for corporate espionage charges, I tell Alexander. And I want to schedule a board meeting where we can present evidence of his hostile actions and remove him from any position of influence over Sterling Pharmaceuticals' strategic planning. Within a week, Alexander has assembled a comprehensive case documenting David's shell company activities, his attempts to purchase Sterling stock, his efforts to manipulate board members, and his coordination with Elena Whitmore's failed infiltration attempt, creating a legal foundation for removing him from Sterling Pharmaceuticals entirely. The board meeting takes place on a Thursday morning in the same conference room where David once convinced me to trust him with Asian expansion plans. But this time I'm presenting evidence of his betrayal rather than listening to his persuasive arguments about pharmaceutical distribution opportunities. Based on Mr. Kim's investigation, I explained to the assembled board members, David Chen has been systematically attempting to undermine Sterling Pharmaceuticals through stock manipulation, corporate espionage, and coordination with outside parties whose interests conflict with our company's objectives, and I believe we need to terminate his association with our company immediately. The evidence speaks for itself. Financial records showing his shell company activities, recordings of his conversations with board members where he questions my competence, documentation of his connection to Elena Whitmore's failed infiltration attempt, creating a pattern of hostile behavior that no reasonable board member could ignore. David's attempts to defend himself only make the situation worse, because his explanations for the shell companies sound evasive and unconvincing. His denials of coordination with Elena are contradicted by phone records, and his claims about legitimate business concerns are undermined by the aggressive tactics he used to pursue them. The vote to terminate his association with Sterling Pharmaceuticals is unanimous, and security escorts him from the building the same day, ending his access to our company resources and our pharmaceutical patents, ensuring that he can never again threaten the Sterling family legacy that 5 generations of my ancestors built through honest innovation and ethical business practices. But I'm not satisfied with merely removing David from Sterling Pharmaceuticals, because I want him to face consequences for the crimes he planned to commit, even if he didn't get the opportunity to execute them fully. Want him to understand that betraying trust and friendship carries costs that extend far beyond immediate business disadvantages. Alexander's investigation has uncovered enough evidence of securities fraud and corporate espionage to support criminal charges, and within 2 weeks of David's termination from Sterling Pharmaceuticals, federal investigators are examining his financial records and questioning him about his shell company activities and attempted stock manipulation. The criminal investigation expands to include Elena and her father when investigators discover that Whitmore Textile's bankruptcy was orchestrated to hide assets that were supposed to be used for coordinating the Sterling Pharmaceuticals infiltration, and all 3 are eventually charged with conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, securities fraud, and wire fraud for their coordination across state lines. The trial takes place 8 months later, and I testify about David's attempts to manipulate Sterling Pharmaceuticals board members and his coordination with Elena's failed infiltration attempt, providing evidence that helps prosecutors demonstrate the scope and sophistication of their conspiracy against my family's company. David receives 5 years in federal prison for securities fraud and corporate espionage, while Elena gets 3 years for conspiracy and wire fraud, and her father gets 2 years for bankruptcy fraud and asset concealment, ensuring that none of them will be in position to threaten Sterling Pharmaceuticals or any other company for the foreseeable future. But the real victory isn't their imprisonment, but the knowledge that I protected my family and my company from destruction while building something positive through partnership with Sophia Laurent, creating value rather than just preventing theft, using my second chance to strengthen Sterling Pharmaceuticals rather than merely surviving David and Elena's attack. By the time of their sentencing, Sterling Pharmaceuticals' European partnership has generated breakthrough research in 3 different therapeutic areas. Our joint laboratories have filed patents for innovative treatments that neither company could have developed independently, and our combined distribution networks have given us access to markets that would have been impossible to reach through purely domestic resources. Sophia and I have also developed a personal relationship that grows naturally from our professional collaboration, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than manipulation and hidden agendas, and I find myself genuinely excited about the future in ways that I never experienced during my previous life with Elena. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Where Elena used charm to disguise predatory intentions, Sophia offers intellectual challenge and emotional honesty. Where David manipulated friendship to facilitate betrayal, Sophia builds trust through demonstrated competence and ethical behavior. Where my previous marriage was founded on deception and exploitation, my relationship with Sophia grows from genuine compatibility and shared vision for pharmaceutical innovation. 6 months after the trial ends, I discovered the divorce papers that I never had to file, stored in my office, safe next to other legal documents that became unnecessary when I prevented the betrayal that would have destroyed my marriage, and I decide to burn them in my fireplace as a symbol of closure with my previous life's trauma. The papers catch fire quickly, transforming legal documentation of marital failure into ash and smoke that dissipates into the night air, and I feel a profound sense of peace as I watch the flames consume evidence of a divorce that never happened, a betrayal that was prevented, a tragedy that was transformed into triumph through knowledge and strategic action. Instead of divorce papers and custody battles, I have partnership agreements with Sophia Loren that will revolutionize pharmaceutical research. Instead of funeral arrangements for my murdered parents, I have dinner plans with them next week where I'll introduce them to the woman I'm planning to marry. Instead of a hostile takeover that would have destroyed 5 generations of sterling innovation, I have a stronger company with broader international reach and more secure intellectual property protection. 2 weeks later, I propose to Sophia during a research trip to Madagascar, where we're investigating botanical compounds that might lead to new pharmaceutical treatments, and I use a ring made from rare minerals we discovered during our collaborative fieldwork rather than a traditional diamond, creating something unique that symbolizes our shared passion for scientific discovery rather than conventional romantic gestures. I love that it represents our work together, Sophia says as she examines the unusual stone, because our relationship has always been about building something meaningful rather than just fulfilling social expectations, and I think that's what makes us stronger than couples who focus on romance without considering compatibility and shared objectives. Our wedding takes place the following spring in a small ceremony that emphasizes substance over spectacle, with guest lists that include research colleagues and family members who genuinely care about our happiness, rather than business connections who view marriage as networking opportunity. And I feel grateful for the second chance that allowed me to experience real love rather than manipulation disguised as affection. During our honeymoon in Switzerland, where we visit pharmaceutical research facilities that might become future collaboration partners, Sophia asks me about my previous relationships and why I seem so certain about what I want in marriage, and I realize that my knowledge of betrayal has made me more appreciative of loyalty. My experience with deception has made me more grateful for honesty. I've learned that trust is the most valuable thing 2 people can share, I tell her as we walk through alpine meadows where pharmaceutical companies cultivate medicinal plants. And I've learned that real partnership requires people who want to build something together rather than people who want to take something from each other. She nods thoughtfully, and I know that she understands the deeper meaning behind my words, even if she doesn't know the specific experiences that taught me these lessons. Because Sophia is someone who values substance over surface, who recognizes that lasting relationships require more than chemistry and convenience. By our first anniversary, Sterling Pharmaceuticals has become one of the most innovative companies in the global pharmaceutical industry. Our European partnership has generated treatments that are improving lives in dozens of countries, and our research pipeline includes potential breakthroughs that could revolutionize medical care for millions of patients worldwide. More importantly, I've built a life based on authentic relationships rather than manipulation. A marriage founded on mutual respect rather than hidden agendas. A business empire strengthened by ethical partnerships rather than weakened by predatory schemes. And I understand that my rebirth was never about revenge, but about learning to recognize and choose genuine value over deceptive appearances. The final irony is that David and Elena's attempt to steal Sterling Pharmaceuticals actually made us stronger by forcing me to seek better partnerships, to develop more secure business practices, to build relationships based on demonstrated trustworthiness rather than assumed loyalty, and their failure became the foundation for success that exceeded anything I could have achieved in my previous life. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had chosen revenge over rebuilding, if I had focused on destroying my enemies rather than strengthening my company. If I had let anger and betrayal define my second chance, rather than using knowledge and wisdom to create something better than what they tried to steal. But then I look at the photograph on my desk showing Sophia and me in our Madagascar laboratory, both of us focused on research that might lead to treatments for diseases that currently have no cure. And I know that I made the right choice, that building something meaningful is always better than destroying something harmful. That peace comes from creating value rather than preventing theft. The divorce papers I burned 2 years ago represented the end of a marriage that never should have happened. But more importantly, they represented the end of a version of myself who was vulnerable to manipulation because he confused trust with naivety, generosity with weakness, love with surrender of judgment. Now I understand that real love requires wisdom as well as emotion, that genuine partnership demands equality rather than submission, that lasting success comes from ethical business practices rather than aggressive acquisition. And I'm grateful for the second chance that taught me these lessons before it was too late to apply them. Sterling Pharmaceuticals will continue growing and innovating long after I'm gone, built on foundations strong enough to withstand any future attacks from people who mistake predation for business acumen. And the Sterling family legacy will endure because I learned to distinguish between people who want to build something together and people who want to take something away. In the end, I didn't just use divorce papers to make peace. I used them to make a better life, a stronger company, a more authentic marriage, and a more secure future for everyone who depends on Sterling Pharmaceuticals for their livelihood, their health, and their hope for medical breakthroughs that might save their lives. That's the real victory. Not that I prevented David and Elena from destroying what my family built, but that I used their attempted betrayal as motivation to build something even better than what they tried to steal. Something that will benefit countless people for generations to come. Something that proves that creation is always more powerful than destruction, that love is always stronger than hate, that truth always defeats deception in the end. And every morning when I wake up next to Sophia, when I read reports from our research laboratories about potential breakthrough treatments, when I receive updates about Sterling Pharmaceuticals' continued growth and innovation, I remember that second chances are gifts that shouldn't be wasted on revenge, but should be invested in building the kind of future that makes the past's pain worthwhile. That's how I used our divorce papers to make peace. Not by forgetting the betrayal that almost destroyed me, but by transforming that knowledge into wisdom, that pain into purpose, that tragedy into triumph, creating something beautiful from something broken, something lasting from something that was meant to be temporary, something real from something that was always just an illusion.